Serious disciple makers need to pay attention to these people. Hi, I'm Darren Wright from DeChurched, where we are all in on mission with Jesus. The fastest growing group of Christians in North America right now is the DeChurched, also referred to as the post-church or the Dones. This was already the case even before COVID-19, but has been accelerated in the last couple of years as people who are kind of on the edge have chosen to pull the plug completely. There are some assumptions that a lot of these people are millennials, and while that's the case, that is not necessarily the bulk of them. The unchurched, the DeChurched, the Dones are spread throughout every demographic, every age group. I once served in a church that was about 100 people. Prior to my arrival, some research had been done, and they discovered, just going through the phone book of their little community, over 300 people who had once attended their church and no longer attended the church, and as far as they knew, no longer attended anywhere. A survey of 100 Dones a few years ago asking why they had actually left their church came up with two primary reasons. Number one, they felt judged. Judged for maybe having doubts, judged for just something in their lifestyle. They felt judged and pulled back. The other reason, rather interesting, is because of the bureaucracy. How it just took so much effort to get anything done. There is such inefficiency. Just to have a dinner or a meal at the church went through all of these layers, and they were frustrated by the bureaucracy. There are several other reasons I've come across why people have pulled out of the church, even if they haven't lost their faith. Often it's because they've been hurt. Now, there are many reasons why they've been hurt. Sometimes they've been hurt by church officials, clearly representative of the church, who've done and said things that are wrong or hurtful. But many times they've been hurt by people in the church, by individuals. It's been a relational issue that they then project onto the entire church. In a lot of cases I've seen in my role as a transitional pastor, going into situations where maybe a pastor has been fired, a lot of times people are hurt vicariously for someone else. They misunderstood what happened and they side with them without knowing the facts. When a pastor is fired, for the right reasons, as some pastors are and should be, they still have supporters who believe no matter what they hear that wrong has been done, and so they are hurt, and many times they leave. Many of the DeChurched would be classified as anti-authority, and we could see that as a negative statement. I suppose it is in some measure. Some are just outright rebellious. They don't want to listen to anybody. They just want to do what they want to do when they want to do it. But some people I've discovered are anti-authority because of the kind of authority they've had to deal with, because of the kind of leaders they've had to deal with. And they're repulsed by anything resembling control. Some people leave the church, the organized church, the institutional church, not the theological church, but the organized church, because that church is not giving them a mission to die for. The church just goes through the motions, puts on services, puts on programs, hires staff, removes staff, just goes through this cycle, and it just becomes all about feeding that machine. And when they look at the numbers, it just makes no sense because, some churches seem to be content spending $50,000, $100,000, $150,000 for one single baptism. And that just doesn't seem like good stewardship. And so people realize that church, if there is a mission, that church doesn't seem to be on mission. They want to be on mission, and so they leave. So how do we actually go about reaching the DeChurched? What are some solutions to this problem? Again, it's easy to identify problems. The challenge is coming up with solutions. Ed Stetzer identifies two different kinds of groups of DeChurched, those who are the open DeChurched and the closed DeChurched, a very helpful distinction. Because regardless of the reason why they left the church, some people are actually open to re-engaging in some measure. Others, not a chance. They want nothing to do with anything that smells like the institutional church, even if they are Christians. Stetzer points out that the DeChurched are only probably going to be reached by a church or by Christians who are different than the ones they left. Different polity, different structure, probably a different theology. It's going to be different than what they left. He also points out that people are going to need a chance to express their pain or their anger, their frustration, their questions, whatever it was that was the pressure point for them that caused them to leave the church. And of course, in dealing with people who've been hurt or withdrawn in some way like that, patience is going to be absolutely essential. I would also add, and I'm speaking here as one who's really at the front end of trying to engage the DeChurched. I'm by no means an expert in this, but I would add some of these observations. We've got to model a way of living on mission versus being compartmentalized. We can't just have our faith over here and the rest of our life over here. We've got to be, as we say at 12 Church, all in on mission with Jesus. Any engagement with the DeChurched needs to be done from a position of actual relationship. Not philosophical debate, not moralistic posturing, but from true relationship. There has to be authenticity in the relationship. And anything we say we believe, there better be some evidence that we believe it, that we're actually living it out. And when you're in relationship with authenticity, of course you are going to have a posture of acceptance towards people, regardless of what they believe, regardless of what their practices have become since they left the church. You will accept them where they are and learn to love them and engage with them. If we're going to work with the DeChurched, the Duns, the post-church people, we need to be very comfortable dealing with people who have doubts and have questions. Yes, we need to be very clear on what's essential, where we are unwavering, but we need to make a very clear distinction in our mind between the primary issues and the secondary, tertiary, and lower issues. And in my mind, this is just me, the primary issues are, who is Jesus and what did he do? And what is the way of salvation? In my mind, everything else is secondary. If it's not a salvation issue, in my mind, it's secondary. But you need to decide what the essentials are. We also need to be uncompromising on what it means to follow Jesus, to represent him, to live for him, and not to compromise and not to lower the bar in any way, to try to attract those who are kind of wavering. We need to call them to a genuine response to Jesus. We also need to challenge whatever really does need challenging. Truth is, a lot of DeChurched, like a lot of people in our culture, like a lot of our church people, live very self-centered lives. Their basic operating philosophy is hedonism. They are living for pleasure, avoiding pain. That is their modus operandi. We need to challenge that because that's contrary to what it means to follow Jesus. When you think about it, reaching or re-reaching the DeChurched is much like reaching the unchurched, reaching those who have no church background. It's like evangelism. And I know a lot of churches and Christians talk about evangelism and then discipleship. Of course, at 12 Church here, we don't talk that way. We talk about disciple making. That includes evangelism. And it means we're calling people to follow Jesus as he calls us to follow. Repentance, belief, and following. And we need to be uncompromising in calling people to follow Jesus in that way. Wherever a DeChurched person is at spiritually, whether they are a Christian, a non-Christian, whether they left over lifestyle issues, theology issues, organizational issues, we need to call them to the same response, following Jesus. And so, as with basic evangelism practice, we need to pray, pay attention to what God is doing, respond to those who respond to us, and show them what it means to follow Jesus.